Thank you. The thing that I thought there should be a law against, I think there already is a law against this, is blocking the doors on the TTC, although I'm also guilty of defying that one. So that was the one that I came up with. I'm gonna lift this a little bit, just to be a little bit more comfy. There we go. Well, thanks for coming out. The first job, or one of the first jobs that I ever had when I was a teenager was a little unusual. I was part of a team of like 5 14-year-old boys who would go downtown, down to the Sky Dome during Blue Jays games and sell nuts and other snacks outside the dome. And the pay wasn't great. We didn't make an hourly wage or anything like that. We were paid on commission. So we made 25% commission on every bag of nuts or popcorn or whatever it was that we were selling. And everything that we sold, our product, was $2. So I would make 50 cents a sale. So on any given night, I would probably be making somewhere like $30, $40. If there was like a big draw, like the Yankees or something, you might make $100, but that was pretty rare. So the pay wasn't great, and the Jays really weren't very good. So they weren't drawing really big crowds. So it was a pretty difficult job. Now, the most important thing to tell you about this job is it was completely illegal. You're not actually allowed to sell nuts on City of Toronto property unless you have a permit. And you're also not allowed to sell nuts on Skydome property unless you work for the Skydome. And I had no permit, and I did not work for Skydome. I worked for a kid in the neighborhood who had a line on some nuts. So it was, the trick of the game wasn't just to sell as many nuts as humanly possible in like your 3-hour shift. You also had to avoid the various enforcement agencies that were patrolling on every night. And there were 2 that were really fearsome. The first was Skydome Security. Now, Skydome Security was staffed by like 19-year-old kids. So looking back on it, they weren't that fearsome, but I was 14, and at the time I was pretty worried about them. And if Skydome Security caught you, what they would do is they would pull you into the basement of the Skydome. And we all called that the dungeon. And you did not want to get pulled into the dungeon. Now, fortunately, I had never got pulled into the dungeon, but my friend Kevin did. And he was gone for like a half hour. And when he came back, he was crying and his nuts were confiscated. So, and he never worked another day in that job again. So that was like it. And the Skydome Security, the good thing about Skydome Security was they were pretty predictable. Like they would run the same beat every night around the same time. So you knew when they were coming. But this was in like 1995, so nobody had cell phones. The 5 of us that were out there, we couldn't call each other to say like heads up. You just had to keep your eyes open and time it. The other enforcement agency that was out there every night, or not every night actually, was the City of Toronto bylaw enforcement. And they were fearsome. These weren't 19-year-old kids, these were men, like big burly men with black uniforms and a badge and a mustache. And the mustache was key actually, because there was a few things more intimidating on a man in 1995 than a mustache. That belonged to like cops or your girlfriend's dad or something. It was like the most terrifying thing you could see as a man with a mustache. And what bylaw enforcement could do if they caught you was write you a huge fine, like $200, $300, $400, like a month, 2 months worth of pay, which none of us really could swallow. Worse was that bylaw enforcement, their beat wasn't as regular as the Skydome Security. They would sometimes take a night off, 2 nights off, maybe even a week. Like they would just not be there. And then they would just materialize like Batman, like they were just behind you right there and you had to kind of keep your eye open at all times and make sure you weren't getting caught by them. Security and bylaw enforcement were the only threats that we had to face. There were also rival illegal nut sellers that would show up, usually on like the big draw nights, like if the Red Sox were in town. And those guys had bats, like baseball bats, not because they were fans, but because they wanted to like beat you out of your territory. And our boss like didn't appreciate this, so he would equip us with bats on those nights and say, defend our spot. And we were 14, so that was not really on. But we also didn't want to disappoint our boss, so fortunately it never actually came to blows, but there were definitely a couple of heated moments when people were like brandishing bats on the bridge between like Front Street and the Skydome, getting ready to go at it, and only like the public protected us from ourselves. The other threats were the buskers. There was a drummer who looked exactly like Juan Guzman, who was a pitcher for the Jays. And the drummer would be set up pretty close to where I would sell my nuts, right off to the side. And he had this really good beat. It would go like, let's go Blue Jays, let's go Blue Jays. And what I would do is I would go stand beside him, and I was like, we have this unofficial business agreement, you know? Like, people come for the beats and stay for the nuts, and we were helping each other out. Like, they would get my change or whatever, they would get my change. So he yelled at me one day. He said, "You're too close, you're taking my business." And I don't think we were really targeting the same market. Like, he was giving entertainment and I was giving sustenance, but it was clearly not gonna fly, so I had to move a little bit. Now, the spot that I occupied was right at the bottom of the CN Tower, which is now today like right where the front door to the aquarium is, but back then was like an open field, and it was where all the people who were coming from Union Station or who were coming from the GO train, they would have to go by me. So it was primo real estate for selling a lot of nuts. Like, everybody had to go by me. And that spot had that going for it, but it had something even better, which was that the line that divided the city of Toronto from the Skydome was painted in this big bright blue band on the ground. So I could see whose jurisdiction I was in and whose laws I was breaking at any given moment. So what I would do is I would set up my hockey bag full of nuts on the line, and then I would just keep an eye open for whoever was coming, and whenever they were coming, I would just move the other way. So if I saw Skydome security, I would step back a couple feet, and they would come up to me and they'd say, "Hey, don't let us see you cross that line." I was like, "I wouldn't even dream of crossing that line. Not even gonna happen." And then they would walk away and I'd go back onto the line. And then I would keep my eyes open. I would see bylaw coming from the other way around. So I would shuffle my nuts on the other side, and that would be, and then the bylaw guy would kind of come up and he would wriggle his mustache at me a little, and I would just kind of give him this look and he would walk away. So it was actually a pretty easy game to play, but it was still pretty stressful. And the only friends that we had out there actually were the scalpers, interestingly. I think they were like, there was a lawlessness, like a kind of a respect. And I remember this one time, one of them came up to me and he said, "Look, you have been using the wrong pitch." Because what I would do is I would hold a bag of nuts in my hand and I would say, "I got peanuts here, I got peanuts, popcorn, sunflower seeds, don't get ripped off inside, buy them out here for cheap." Which was really direct, I thought, like a good pitch, and worked. But he said what I should say is, "I got the biggest nuts in town, if you don't believe me, squeeze the bag." And I was 14, so that was hilarious to me. So I tried it, I tried it a couple times, but I was 14. So I didn't really have the like psychological or truthfully physiological confidence to back that statement up. So it kind of fell flat, it was kind of awkward. And that was the way that summer went. I would kind of sit there and I would shuffle the bag back and forth and I'd try not to get caught. And it was kind of thrilling in a way. Like, I wasn't making a lot of money and there was a threat of violence constantly around me. And I had Juan Guzman yelling at me, it was a big mess. But for some reason, there was something really thrilling about it. And I think it was the fact that I was kind of getting away from the rules a little bit. Like, you're 14 years old and you realize your whole life has been shaped by rules and structures in the world of adults. And here I was pushing, even breaking those rules and getting away with it. Most of the time, I was literally crossing the line and getting away with it on a nightly basis. So it was pretty thrilling. And the season wore on, and finally it was September and the Jays weren't gonna make the playoffs or the World Series. I'm not actually a baseball fan, but I think it's the World Series. So it was like last week of the season and I was getting ready to go back to school, I was kind of done. And the bylaw enforcement people actually hadn't been around for like a good month. And I think we all thought like we'd given them the slip, or they just got tired of not catching us, or they had bigger fish to fry than the illegal nut sellers outside Skydome. So they were gone. And it was a pain to lug your nuts back and forth across that line all the time. So I just decided I would just set up on City of Toronto property. And I did that for a good month and nothing bad ever happened. I would just stand there. It was still close to the line. It was still in sight, but it wasn't worth it to move it back and forth. Bylaw wasn't coming around. So I was standing there, third last game of the season, nuts in hand, just standing there, and I hear this voice behind me go, "Excuse me." And I turned around and there was like a mustache right there. It was attached to a man in a black uniform with a badge. And he says to me, "I've seen you here every night of the season. And I know you know what you're doing is wrong. I know you know you're breaking the law, and I'm sick of it. So I'm gonna write you a fine. Give me some ID." Which, like, at the time was probably like a library card or a health card or something, but still it was like, my blood went cold. And I thought about bolting. I was just like, I could just run. I knew all the nooks and crannies, I've been there all summer, and I thought I could probably get away with this. But this guy had a mustache. Like, that wasn't gonna work. There's no way. So, like, I panicked in a totally different way, which is I just leaned over and I started packing everything up, just tossing all the nuts and popcorn and sunflower seeds and everything I had in the bag. And I started talking, just kind of freestyling. And I said, look, you know what, you are right. You have seen me here almost every night of the season, and I have been breaking the law, and I know I've been doing it. And to be totally honest, it's not worth it. Like, I gotta run from you every night, I gotta run from the security every night, I got Juan Guzman over there yelling at me, like, this is not working out. And so you never will see me here again, because I quit. Like, as if he was my boss. I said to him, I quit. Like, you can't arrest me because I quit. And I put the bag over my shoulder and I just started walking away. And towards the line. And in my mind, like, that line was like political asylum. Like, if I could just get across to the Skydome side before he caught me, I would be free. I don't think it's how it works, but in my mind, that was what I was doing. And I kept walking and walking and walking, and finally I did cross the line and nothing happened. And I didn't dare turn around, and I just kept walking and walking and walking, and finally I made my way to the bench where we would all meet after the game and kind of meet and tell our war stories and cash out and give our whatever product we haven't sold and get paid. And my boss was sitting there waiting. He said, well, you're early. Like, what are you doing here now? And so I told him what happened. And I said, look, I know it's like unprofessional not to give 2 weeks notice, and like I might be burning my bridges in this industry, but like I can't do this anymore, man. I'm done. He was very gracious. He thanked me for my service, and said, be well, goodbye. And so I started walking away, and as I walked away, I kind of realized that what I had told that bylaw officer was true. Like, I was sick of the job. I did hate it. It had started off in this really thrilling kind of like cross the line and get away with it. But it actually just ended up being a pain and not really making a lot of money. So as I walked out, I realized that I was on Skydome property and I had to leave and go onto the city of Toronto to get on the subway and go home. And so as I did, I crossed that blue line one last time, and for the first time that summer, I could just keep walking. Thanks. That's it.